Imagine standing in front of a mother who knows her child is about to die. Not tomorrow, not next month, but soon. Imagine looking into her eyes as she faces a choice no parent should ever have to make. Keep her child with her, and almost certainly lose them. Or hand that child to a stranger and never see them again. What would you do? During World War II, deep inside Nazi-occupied Poland, thousands of Jewish families faced that impossible decision every single day. Behind high walls topped with barbed wire, the Warsaw Ghetto had become one of the most crowded and desperate places on earth. Children cried from hunger. Families slept in tiny rooms packed with strangers. Disease spread faster than medicine, and every passing week brought new rumors. Rumors of deportations, rumors of disappearances, rumors that people taken away were never coming back. Most of the world looked away. Many were too afraid to help. Others believed there was nothing they could do. But one woman refused to accept that. Her name was Irena Sendler. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about her. She was not a soldier. She carried no weapon, she commanded no army, she held no political power. And yet, what she chose to do would become one of the most remarkable rescue missions in modern history. Because while others saw walls, she saw a way through. While others saw danger, she saw children who needed help. And while others feared what might happen if they were caught, she decided that doing nothing was the greater crime. Day after day, she entered the Warsaw Ghetto, not as a prisoner, but as a social worker. Officially, she was there to inspect health conditions and help control outbreaks of disease. The Nazis feared epidemics. They feared sickness spreading beyond the ghetto walls, so they allowed certain workers to enter. It was a small opening, a tiny crack in a system built on cruelty, and Irena intended to use it. The first time she walked through those gates, she saw scenes she would never forget. Children with hollow faces, parents desperately searching for food, people fighting not for comfort, but for survival. She saw boys and girls so weak they could barely stand, babies wrapped in worn blankets, families trying to protect one another despite having almost nothing left. And every day, conditions grew worse. The walls of the ghetto were not simply barriers of brick. They were barriers between life and death. Inside, thousands were trapped. Outside, the world continued moving. But Irena could not forget what she had seen. She could not return home each evening and pretend those children did not exist. Because every day she waited, more of them died. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, standing inside the ghetto, she realized a terrible truth. If these children stayed here, most would not survive. Not because they had done anything wrong, not because they were guilty of any crime, but simply because they had been born Jewish. That realization haunted her. It followed her home. It followed her into her dreams. And eventually it led her to a decision that would place her life in constant danger. She would get the children out. Somehow. At first, the idea seemed impossible. The ghetto was heavily guarded. Nazi soldiers watched entrances and exits. Anyone caught helping Jewish families faced imprisonment, torture, or execution. Yet Irena could not stop thinking about those children. She began speaking quietly with trusted friends, members of the Polish underground resistance, people willing to risk everything. Together, they started building a network, a secret rescue operation, one child at a time. But convincing parents was often the hardest part. Imagine being a mother in the Warsaw Ghetto. A stranger approaches. She tells you she might be able to save your child, but only if you let that child leave with her. No guarantees, no promises, no certainty that you will ever meet again. Could you do it? Many parents cried. Many hesitated. Some refused. Others agreed through tears. Because deep inside, they knew the truth. Keeping their children close might comfort them today, but it could cost them tomorrow. And so, one by one, the rescues began. Some children left hidden inside ambulances. Others were carried through secret routes. Some traveled inside toolboxes, some beneath supplies. Each rescue carried enormous risk. A single mistake, a single suspicious guard, a single cry from a frightened child could mean death for everyone involved. And yet, Irena continued every day, every week, every month. She moved through a world of fear, carrying something stronger than fear itself. Hope. But as the number of rescued children grew, so did the danger. The Nazis were becoming more suspicious. Rumors spread that someone was helping people escape. Investigations intensified. Informants searched for clues. And somewhere in the shadows, the trap was slowly closing around the woman responsible. A woman who would soon face a choice of her own. A choice that would test her courage beyond anything she had ever imagined. Because saving children was only the beginning. Staying silent after being caught would require even greater bravery. And before this story ends, you will discover how one ordinary woman helped save approximately 2,500 children, why the Nazis desperately wanted her captured, and how a handful of names hidden inside glass jars would one day become her greatest legacy. This is the true story of Irena Sendler, the woman who walked into one of history's darkest places and carried hope out with her, long before the world knew her name, long before secret rescue missions and Nazi manhunts. Irena Sendler was simply a little girl growing up in Poland. She was born on February 15th, 1910. At the time, nobody could have imagined that this quiet child would one day help save thousands of lives. Her hometown was not rich. The streets were simple. Life moved slowly. People worked hard for everything they had. Yet within that ordinary world, something extraordinary was shaping the young girl she would become. It began with her father. His name was Warsaw Sendler. He was a doctor. But unlike many doctors of his time, he cared less about money and more about people, especially those who had nowhere else to turn. Many of his patients were poor. Many could not afford treatment. Some belonged to communities that faced prejudice and discrimination, including Jewish families. At a time when many people kept their distance from Jews, Dr. Sendler treated them exactly the same as everyone else. To him, a sick child was simply a sick child. A suffering parent was simply a suffering parent. Human need came before everything else. Young Irena watched this closely. She saw people arriving at their home seeking help. She saw gratitude in their eyes. And she saw her father give what little he had without expecting anything in return. One lesson stayed with her forever. Years later, she would remember his words that would guide every major decision of her life. He told her, "If you see someone drowning, you must try to save them, even if you cannot swim." At the time, it sounded like a simple lesson about kindness. But one day, it would become something much bigger. Then tragedy struck. When Irena was still a child, a deadly typhus epidemic spread through the region. Many doctors refused to treat infected patients. The disease was highly contagious. People were terrified. But Dr. Sendler refused to turn anyone away. Day after day, he continued helping those who needed him, especially poor Jewish families. He knew the risks. Yet he continued. Eventually, he became infected himself. Not long afterward, he died. Irena was only 7 years old. The loss devastated her family. The man who had taught her compassion, the man who had shown her what courage looked like, was gone. For many children, such a loss might have created bitterness, but in Irena, it created something different. A responsibility. She felt as if her father had handed her an invisible torch, and now it was her duty to carry it forward. Something remarkable happened after his death. Members of the local Jewish community learned about the family's financial struggles. They knew what Dr. Sendler had done for them. They remembered the countless times he had treated patients who could not pay, and they wanted to help. Jewish leaders offered financial support so that young Irena could continue her education. The gesture left a deep impression on her. Years later, when people asked why she risked everything to save Jewish children, part of the answer could be found here, in those early acts of kindness, in those memories of gratitude. As she grew older, Irena developed a strong sense of justice. She disliked unfairness. She disliked seeing people treated differently because of who they were, and she was never afraid to speak her mind. At university, these beliefs often put her into conflict with authorities. During the 1930s, anti-Semitism was increasing in many parts of Europe, including Poland. Jewish students frequently faced discrimination. Special seating arrangements were introduced. Some universities attempted to separate Jewish and non-Jewish students. Irena opposed these policies openly. She believed such treatment was wrong, and unlike many others, she refused to stay silent. Her actions brought consequences. University officials did not appreciate students challenging the system, yet Irena remained stubborn. She had inherited something from her father, the belief that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was easy. After completing her studies, she began working in social services. The work suited her perfectly. Every day, she encountered families struggling with poverty, children needing support, people who had been forgotten by society. She listened, she helped, and she built relationships across different communities. What she could not know was that these experiences were preparing her for something far greater. Because beyond Poland's borders, dark clouds were gathering. Across Europe, dangerous political movements were growing stronger. One man in Germany was rapidly gaining power. His name was Adolf Hitler. His speeches attracted massive crowds. His promises of national greatness appealed to millions. But hidden beneath those promises was hatred. A hatred that would soon consume an entire continent. As the 1930s moved forward, tensions increased. Governments argued, armies expanded, newspapers spoke of possible war, yet many ordinary people hoped the crisis would pass. They wanted to believe peace would survive. Irena was among those trying to continue their daily lives, working, helping others, building a future. But history had already begun moving toward catastrophe. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Within days, bombs fell from the sky. Cities burned, families fled. Panic spread across the country. The Second World War had begun. Everything changed. The routines of ordinary life disappeared almost overnight. Soldiers marched through the streets. Government institutions collapsed. Fear settled over the nation. For Poland's Jewish population, the danger was even greater. new restrictions appeared quickly. Rights disappeared, opportunities vanished, and before long, entire communities found themselves trapped under increasingly brutal Nazi control. Watching these events unfold, Irena felt the same emotions many others felt: shock, fear, uncertainty. But beneath those emotions, another feeling was growing: determination, because she recognized something that many people were still refusing to accept. The suffering she was witnessing was not temporary. It was only beginning. And soon, very soon, the city of Warsaw would become home to one of the most infamous places in human history. A place surrounded by walls, a place filled with despair, a place where hundreds of thousands of people would be trapped. The Warsaw Ghetto. And when that moment came, Irena Sendler would face a choice that would define the rest of her life inside the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto. When the war began, the city of Warsaw changed almost overnight. The streets that once echoed with ordinary life now carried the sounds of military vehicles. German soldiers appeared everywhere. New rules were announced, new restrictions followed, and fear settled over the city like a heavy fog. For Poland's Jewish population, the situation grew worse with each passing month. Families lost their jobs. Businesses were confiscated. People were forced to wear identifying armbands. Freedom disappeared piece by piece. Then came one of the most devastating decisions made by the Nazi authorities. A section of Warsaw would be sealed off. High walls would be built, and hundreds of thousands of Jewish men, women, and children would be forced inside. The place became known as the Warsaw Ghetto. For those trapped within its walls, life changed forever. Entire families were crammed into tiny apartments. Several households often shared a single room. Food became scarce, medicine nearly impossible to obtain. Every day brought new suffering. Outside the walls, people could still move through the city. Inside, survival itself became a daily struggle. As a social worker, Irena Sendler watched these developments with growing concern. The stories reaching her office were heartbreaking. Children collapsing from hunger, families torn apart, disease spreading through overcrowded streets. Many people felt helpless, but Irena could not ignore what was happening. Soon, an opportunity appeared. The Nazis feared epidemics. If disease spread beyond the ghetto, it could affect German personnel as well. Because of this, certain health and social workers were granted limited access inside. Irena volunteered. Officially, she would enter to inspect sanitary conditions and assist with health-related concerns. Unofficially, she wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. The first time she passed through the ghetto gates, the sight before her was overwhelming. Children wandered through the streets wearing clothes far too thin for the cold weather. Their faces looked older than their years. Many searched for scraps of food. Others simply sat against walls, exhausted from hunger. Mothers stood in long lines hoping for bread. Fathers searched desperately for work that no longer existed. Everywhere she looked, people were trying to survive. The smell of sickness lingered in the air. The sounds of coughing echoed from crowded buildings. And despite the suffering, families still tried to care for one another. Parents shared their last pieces of bread with their children. Grandparents comforted frightened grandchildren. Humanity survived, even in a place designed to destroy hope. Each evening, When Irena returned home, the images stayed with her. The faces of hungry children, the worried expressions of parents, the silent fear that filled the streets. She could not forget them. And the more often she entered the ghetto, the more she realized something terrible. Conditions were becoming worse, not better. Food rations continued shrinking, disease continued spreading, and rumors began circulating. Rumors about deportations, rumors about trains, rumors about people being taken away and never returning. No one knew the full truth yet, but many suspected something horrifying was coming. One afternoon, while visiting a family in a cramped apartment, Irena met a little girl. The child could not have been more than 6 years old. She sat quietly beside her mother, thin, weak, yet somehow still smiling. The girl's mother spoke softly. She asked Irena a question she would never forget. "Will anyone help our children?" For a moment, Irena had no answer, because she knew the truth. There was no government rescue coming, no international army waiting outside the walls, no miracle solution. If help came at all, it would come from ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks. That night, she barely slept. The mother's question echoed through her mind. "Will anyone help our children?" Again and again, the next morning, she returned to work. But something had changed. She was no longer simply observing suffering. She was searching for a way to stop it. At first, her efforts were small. She smuggled food, medicine, clothing, anything that might help families survive a little longer. Friends and colleagues quietly assisted her. Together, they moved supplies into the ghetto whenever possible. But deep down, Irena knew it wasn't enough. Food could delay starvation, medicine could fight disease, yet neither could solve the larger problem. The children remained trapped, and every day they remained trapped. The danger increased. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, while walking through the ghetto streets, Irena stopped near a group of children playing beside a damaged wall. They laughed. They chased one another. For a brief moment, they looked like children anywhere in the world, but then she noticed how thin they were, how weak, how fragile, and suddenly a terrible realization struck her. If these children stayed here, most of them would die, not because they had done anything wrong, not because they were criminals, but simply because they had been born into the wrong place at the wrong time. The thought was unbearable, and yet it was true. That realization forced her to make a decision, perhaps the most important decision of her life. She would not merely bring food, she would not merely bring medicine, she would get the children out. How? She did not yet know. The walls were guarded, the gates watched carefully, every exit was dangerous. Anyone caught helping Jewish families faced severe punishment, imprisonment, torture, execution. Yet the risks no longer mattered as much as the children. Over the following weeks, Irena began contacting trusted friends, members of underground resistance networks, people willing to oppose Nazi rule. Quiet meetings took place behind closed doors. Plans were discussed in whispers. Ideas were tested. Some failed immediately. Others seemed possible gradually. A rescue network began to form. Not large, not powerful, but determined. Their goal was simple: save as many children as possible, one child at a time. Yet before a single rescue could happen, another challenge remained: the parents. Because convincing a mother or father to hand over their child, even to save their life, would be one of the hardest tasks Irena would ever face. And soon, the first desperate families would have to make an impossible choice, a choice between staying together or giving their children a chance to survive. The decision had been made. Now came the difficult part, turning that decision into reality. Irena Sendler understood the risks better than anyone. Helping Jewish families was already dangerous, but smuggling children out of the Warsaw Ghetto was something else entirely. If she were caught, there would be no second chance, no warning, no mercy. The punishment would be immediate and likely fatal. Yet every day she entered the ghetto, she became more convinced that waiting was no longer an option. The situation inside the walls was deteriorating rapidly. Food was disappearing. Disease was spreading. And rumors of deportations were becoming impossible to ignore. People whispered about trains, about families vanishing overnight, about destinations from which nobody returned. No one knew the full truth yet, but fear was everywhere, and in many homes, parents had begun asking themselves an impossible question. How do you save your child when you cannot save yourself? The first rescue required more courage than any that followed, because nobody knew whether it would work. One mistake could destroy the entire operation before it truly began. Irena met with trusted members of the underground resistance. Together, they discussed possible routes, possible hiding places, possible ways to move children beyond the ghetto walls. Every option carried danger, every plan contained uncertainty. Still, they moved forward, because doing nothing guaranteed tragedy. The first family she approached lived in a small apartment, crowded with relatives. The room was cold, the food supply nearly gone. The parents sat quietly as Irena explained her proposal. Their young daughter listened from a corner, too young to understand the full conversation, yet old enough to sense the fear in the room. Irena spoke honestly. She made no promises. She offered no false hope. She simply explained the truth. If the child remained inside the ghetto, her chances of survival were growing smaller every day. Outside, there might be a future, there might be safety, but there were no guarantees. The mother began to cry. The father lowered his head. Neither wanted to make such a choice. No parent should ever have to make such a choice. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then, finally, the mother nodded, slowly, painfully, with tears in her eyes. She agreed. The rescue was arranged for the following day. That night, few people slept. Not Irena, not the parents, and certainly not the members of the rescue network. Too much depended on what happened next. The following morning, the child was prepared for the journey. Her mother brushed her hair carefully, perhaps for the last time. Her father held her close, trying to memorize every detail of her face, every smile, every expression. The child did not fully understand why everyone seemed so emotional. She simply trusted the adults around her. When the moment arrived, the goodbye was almost unbearable. The mother kissed her daughter repeatedly, whispering words of love, words of comfort, words she prayed the child would remember. Then she handed her over, and just like that, the rescue began. Irena led the child toward one of the planned escape routes. Every step felt dangerous. Every passing guard increased the tension. The adults involved knew that discovery could mean death, not only for themselves, but for countless others. The child remained quiet. The route held, and after what felt like an eternity, they reached safety. The first rescue had succeeded. A single child, one life saved. To some people, that might not have seemed like much, but to Irena, it meant everything. Because now she knew it was possible. The walls were not impenetrable. The system could be challenged. The operation could grow. Soon, more families began hearing whispers, stories of children escaping, stories of safe places beyond the ghetto, stories of a woman willing to risk everything. Some parents approached her. Others had to be convinced. Every conversation was heartbreaking. Many mothers cried. Many fathers struggled to speak. Some initially refused, not because they doubted Irena, but because they loved their children so deeply. The thought of separation felt unbearable, and yet, as conditions worsened, more and more families made the painful decision. They chose hope, even when hope required sacrifice. As the number of rescues increased, new methods became necessary. Children were hidden in different ways. Some were carried through buildings connected by secret passages. Others left through carefully planned routes that avoided suspicion. Each rescue demanded creativity, patience, and nerves of steel. The younger children were often easier to move. Infants could sometimes be hidden beneath blankets or supplies. Older children faced a different challenge. They needed new identities, new names, new stories. They had to learn how to answer questions, how to avoid revealing information that could expose them. Even the smallest mistake could be dangerous. Yet despite these challenges, the network continued growing. One child became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became dozens. And with every successful rescue, Irena's determination grew stronger. But success brought new dangers. Because while children were disappearing from the ghetto, the Nazis were noticing unusual patterns. Questions began to circulate. Guards became more alert. Inspections became more frequent. The margin for error became smaller. Some members of the resistance warned that the operation was becoming too risky. Perhaps they should slow down. Perhaps they should wait. But Irena refused. She knew time was running out. For every day she delayed, more children were lost, and so the rescues continued, faster, bolder, more dangerous than before. What she did not yet realize was that the greatest challenge still lay ahead. Because soon, she would begin keeping a secret record, a record so important that she would risk her life to protect it. A list of names, thousands of names, names that one day might reunite children with their families. If those families survived the war, and those fragile pieces of paper hidden from the Nazis would become one of the most powerful symbols of hope in the entire story. As more children escaped the Warsaw Ghetto, a new problem emerged. Saving a child's life was only the first step. The second challenge was protecting their identity, because every child leaving the ghetto was leaving behind more than a dangerous place. They were leaving behind their name, their family, and their history. And if the war ever ended, how would anyone know who they truly were? This question haunted Irena Sendler. Every child she rescued carried a story. A mother waiting, a father hoping, grandparents, brothers, sisters, entire families separated by war, if those children survived. And if any relatives survived, they would need a way to find each other again. So Irena began creating a secret record. For every rescued child, she carefully wrote down 2 identities: the child's real name and the new identity given for protection. The lists were detailed, precise, and incredibly dangerous, because if the Nazis discovered them, thousands of children could be exposed. Entire rescue networks could collapse, and countless families would lose their last chance of reunion. Yet Irena continued. Night after night, she carefully recorded every name, every detail, every clue that might one day reconnect a child with their past. As the rescue operation expanded, the number of names grew rapidly, dozens, then hundreds, then even more. Soon, simple hiding places were no longer safe enough. The information had become too valuable and too dangerous. A new solution was needed. One evening, after reviewing another list of rescued children, Irena made a decision. The records would be hidden underground, far from Nazi eyes, far from unexpected searches, far from anyone who might betray the operation. The names were placed inside glass jars, carefully folded, protected from weather and time. Then, under the cover of darkness, trusted members of the network carried the jars to secret locations. The earth was opened, the jars were buried, and the ground was covered once more to anyone passing by. Nothing seemed unusual, no sign existed of the priceless information hidden beneath the soil. But underground, hope had been preserved. The jars became silent guardians of thousands of identities, waiting for a future nobody could guarantee would ever arrive. Meanwhile, inside the Warsaw Ghetto, conditions continued to deteriorate. By now, deportations had become a terrifying reality. Families disappeared almost daily. Entire streets seemed emptier than before. Whispers spread through the community. People spoke of trains, of camps, of horrors almost impossible to comprehend. Panic grew, and so did desperation. Parents who had once hesitated now searched desperately for help. Many approached Irena directly. Some begged, others cried. All understood that time was running out. Every rescue became a race against fate. The network worked relentlessly. Children were moved through increasingly creative methods. Some escaped hidden beneath blankets. Others traveled through secret passages. Some left disguised under entirely new identities. Every operation required planning, patience, and extraordinary courage. The children themselves showed remarkable bravery. Many were very young, yet they quickly learned difficult lessons. They memorized new names, new family histories, new answers to dangerous questions. A mistake could expose everything. Still, they adapted because survival demanded it. As months passed, stories about the mysterious rescues began spreading beyond the ghetto. People whispered about children who vanished only to reappear somewhere safer. Rumors circulated about a woman helping families, a woman willing to risk execution, a woman who seemed impossible to stop. The Nazis heard those rumors too. At first, they dismissed them. Then they grew curious, and eventually concerned. Investigations quietly began. Officials searched for unusual activity. Records were examined. Questions were asked. Informants were encouraged to report suspicious behavior. The pressure increased. Members of the resistance noticed it immediately. Meetings became more cautious. Routes changed frequently. Names were shared only when absolutely necessary. Everyone understood the danger. The rescue network had become too successful to remain invisible forever. One evening, after completing another operation, Irena sat alone reviewing the latest records. The room was quiet. Outside, wartime Warsaw remained trapped under occupation. But inside, she found herself thinking about the children, where they were sleeping, whether they felt safe, whether they remembered their parents, whether those parents were still alive. The burden was enormous, yet she never considered stopping, because she knew something important. Every child rescued represented an entire future, a future family, future generations, lives that might exist only because someone had acted when action seemed impossible. But the danger surrounding her was growing. The Nazis were getting closer. The investigations were becoming more serious. And somewhere within the machinery of occupation, her name had begun attracting attention. The woman saving children was no longer invisible. And soon, very soon, the hunt for Irena Sendler would begin. By late 1943, the danger surrounding Irena Sendler had become impossible to ignore. For years, she had operated in the shadows, moving children, building networks, protecting identities, and hiding thousands of names beneath the earth. But no secret operation could remain invisible forever. The Nazis had noticed. Investigations intensified. Questions multiplied. Informants were questioned, records examined, suspicious activities tracked. Slowly, the circle around Irena began to close. Then, one autumn morning, the knock finally came. Gestapo officers arrived without warning. The secret police had earned a terrifying reputation across occupied Europe. People disappeared after visits from the Gestapo. Many were never seen again. When they entered Irena's home, they searched everything: drawers, documents, personal belongings, anything that might expose the resistance network, anything that might reveal the location of rescued children, anything that might lead them to names. But the most important records were not inside the house. The jars remained hidden, buried safely beneath the ground. The officers arrested her immediately. There were no lengthy explanation, no opportunity to prepare. Within moments, she was taken away. As the door closed behind her, Irena understood exactly what was happening. The rescue mission had entered its most dangerous chapter. She was transported to Pawiak prison, one of the most feared prisons in Nazi-occupied Poland. The walls of that prison had witnessed unimaginable suffering. Inside, prisoners lived with constant uncertainty. Every day could bring interrogation, punishment, or execution. Soon, the questioning began. The Gestapo wanted information: names, locations, contacts, safe houses, routes, anything connected to the rescue network. Again and again, they asked the same questions. Again and again, Irena gave them nothing. The interrogations became harsher. Then harsher still. The Nazis believed pain could force people to speak, and so they used violence, brutal violence. They beat her repeatedly. They tortured her. They broke bones in her legs and feet. The injuries were severe. The suffering was enormous, yet through every interrogation, through every threat, through every act of cruelty, she remained silent. Not because she was fearless, but because she understood the consequences. If she spoke, Children would die. Families in hiding would be discovered. The entire rescue network could collapse. And so, despite unbearable pain, she protected the secret. The names remained safe. The jars remained hidden. And the children remained beyond Nazi reach. Weeks passed. The Gestapo grew increasingly frustrated. They could not understand how one woman could endure so much and still refuse to cooperate. Many prisoners eventually broke under torture, but Irena did not. The names of thousands of children stayed locked inside her mind. Eventually, the Nazis reached a decision. Since they could not extract information, they would eliminate the problem. A death sentence was issued. The order was clear. Irena Sendler was to be executed. For most people, such a sentence would have marked the end of the story. But history sometimes turns on unexpected moments. Outside prison walls, members of the Polish resistance were still working, and they had not forgotten her. The underground organization understood exactly how important she was, not simply because of what she had done, but because of what she still knew. Quietly, they began making plans. Money changed hands. Secret negotiations took place. Bribes were arranged. And then, in one of the most remarkable escapes of the war, the resistance succeeded. On the day scheduled for her execution, a guard secretly helped arrange her release. Official records would show that she had been executed. As far as the Nazis were concerned, Irena Sendler was dead. But she wasn't. She disappeared into hiding, living under false identities, moving carefully through occupied Poland, always aware that discovery could mean immediate death. Yet even after torture, even after imprisonment, even after narrowly escaping execution, she did not stop helping. The war continued, and so did her commitment. Meanwhile, the children she had rescued remained scattered across safe locations, convents, orphanages, private homes, resistance shelters. Many carried new names. Many no longer looked like the children who had once lived inside the Warsaw Ghetto, but they were alive. And that was what mattered. Finally, in 1945, the war in Europe came to an end. Nazi Germany collapsed, the occupation ended, and survivors slowly emerged from years of darkness. For Irena, another mission now began. The jars. For years they had remained hidden beneath the soil, protected from discovery, protected from destruction, and protected from the war itself. Now they could finally be recovered. One by one, the buried containers were retrieved. Inside remained the precious lists, thousands of names, the real identities of rescued children, the connection between past and future. Irena and her colleagues began the heartbreaking process of searching for relatives, hoping to reunite families, hoping parents had survived, hoping brothers and sisters were still alive. But reality was cruel. Many families never returned. Many parents had been murdered in Nazi camps. Many children would never again see the people who had given them life. The list could preserve names, but they could not reverse history. Even so, the records achieved something extraordinary. They ensured that identities were not lost, that memories survived, that children would know who they truly were. Years passed, then decades. The world moved on, new generations were born. And surprisingly, for a long time, few people knew Irena's story. She rarely spoke about herself. She never claimed to be a hero. When praised, she often insisted that she could have done more, that she had not saved enough. It was a response that revealed her character. Even after helping approximately 2,500 children survive, she focused on those she could not reach. Then, many years later, the world finally began discovering what she had done. Historians researched the rescue network, survivors shared memories, students learned her story, and people everywhere expressed amazement at her courage. Awards followed, recognition followed, but perhaps the greatest tribute was something simpler: the lives she helped preserve. Thousands of children survived because one woman refused to look away. Those children grew up, many became parents, then grandparents, and eventually great-grandparents. Entire generations exist today because Irena Sendler chose action instead of silence, because she entered a place filled with despair and carried hope out with her. She never commanded an army, never carried a rifle into battle, never wore the uniform of a famous general. Yet her courage changed thousands of lives, and that is why her story still matters. Because history is not shaped only by powerful leaders. Sometimes, history is changed by a single person who sees suffering and decides to help, no matter the cost. And among the countless stories of World War II, the story of Irena Sendler remains one of the brightest, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion can survive, hope can survive, and courage can survive if someone is brave enough to protect it